Professors Zvi Bodie, Robert Merton, and Richard Thakor are pleased to introduce their new textbook, Principles of Finance. Principles of Finance was written for the MBA or undergraduate first course in finance, as well as follow-on courses, providing a clear, accessible, and thorough explanation of the principles of finance and how they connect to real-world practice and how they are used to solve problems. Professors, can you please speak about your motivation for writing Principles of Finance?
My motivation for undertaking this effort, this joint effort, was the conclusion I drew that finance is an applied science that had seen a lot of advances in the past few decades. And those advances were not all incorporated. Important advances were not incorporated in any of the existing textbooks. And when I communicated this to Bob Merton and to Richard Thakor, they agreed with me. It was wonderful, that feeling that they too shared a conviction that there needed to be a new textbook about the fundamentals of finance. And so what could be better? I mean, I learned finance from Bob Merton. And I think that's the case with Richard as well, although it was several decades later. And we shared the outlook and we shared the work. So the book is here.
Well, that's great, Zvi. But my motivation, first, I should say, like you, my whole professional life, I've been a professor. And the role of professors is fundamentally knowledge creation with original research, of course, but also knowledge dissemination, which is teaching and textbooks. So that's what I've been doing all my life. Now, you mentioned finance as applied science. Finance is a science. Now, it hasn't always been a science. And finance has been around forever, so going back in before counted time. But it's a science that really happened about, I would say, starting in the 1950s, and by the end of the 1960s, it was a full-fledged science. And that, if you have any doubt about that, there are probably at least 8 Nobel Prizes in economic sciences for finance contributions. So, not that, okay. But I believe in that you should take advantage of the fact that it is a science and that it should be taught taking advantage of the structure, the organizational structure of science. Basically, there are core concepts, principles, and then you use those as a foundation for which you then go into all the aspects of that science. It's not because it's a science, it's not just a series of separated topics that you learn. You learn 10 topics to be in this field. It's all integrated. And that's a great advantage in teaching, I found, in both efficiency and ability to adapt to change. So science is based on principles and core concepts. And so a first course, an introduction to the subject, shouldn't be just, corporate finance, a topic, capital markets, a topic, financial institutions, a topic, all important. But the first course should be principles and core concepts that will be involved as the base for all those individual subjects and integrated. And So I think that, when you look around, I think you mentioned it a minute ago, that as far as I know, no textbook has been produced, introductory textbook, which does that. And so we have done that here, and the structure of the book reflects that. And I think that was the main motivation for me getting engaged in this at this point in my life.
Well, these are great points, and I think it echoes my own motivation for working on the project. I've always had a passion for teaching finance, and one thing I tell my students when I teach them is that finance is important because it's not just applicable for those that are working in the financial industry, but it's applicable for anything they may do, whether it's in the financial industry or another industry or the government. Finance applies to everything. And it also applies to individual decisions as well. And I think that's something that was really exciting to me about teaching finance. But what I found is that for students, learning finance is challenging. There are lots of institutional details. It's also a mixture of intuition and mathematics that just makes it challenging for students to penetrate into. And so when I got the opportunity to work with both of you, amazing co-authors, on this project, I was really excited because I think the approach that we decided to take was really powerful for giving students the tools to understand finance at an intuitive level and really penetrate through a lot of the challenges that at least I saw in my teaching they were experiencing with learning finance.
Yeah, the main features of the textbook are, first of all, it's principles-based. Like any science-based textbook, you want, and we wanted, to base the book, we wanted it to be appropriate for many years to come. We didn't want to have it based on particular set of institutions that are in constant flux. So we arrived at a set of 10 basic principles, which I'm not going to go through right now, but they form the core of the science of finance as we see it. And they're going to be good, we are convinced, for a long time to come. Another feature of the book is that it incorporates the latest aspects or the latest ideas in the science of finance. A good example of that being options. And I won't go into that. My colleagues will talk more about that. And third of all, we incorporate flexibility of structure of the book so that it can be used whether the emphasis is on corporate finance, which it is. The first course in many universities is corporate finance, or investments and personal finance. No matter which emphasis the course has, our book is appropriate. And in fact, it's probably appropriate for a 2-course sequence in fundamentals of finance. So those are the main features. Principles based, starting from chapter 1, where we explain what our 10 basic principles are, means that the book is concerned with fundamental concepts that are appropriate, but first of all, that apply across all the subfields, corporate finance and investments and capital markets. These 10 principles, for example, I'll just give one because this is not the place or the time to go into all 10 of them. The principle of valuation by comparables and the law of one price, very fundamental concept. That flows through to all chapters of the book, as do the other principles, the other 9 principles. So principles, as opposed to what is often the case in introductory textbooks in finance, a list of financial institutions. Here's what a bank is, here's what a mutual fund is, etc. The principles approach is much more long-lasting, appropriate, no matter what country you're talking about, no matter what period you're talking about. So that's what we mean by the principles-based approach, and it's why we've adopted it for our textbook.
First, I would point out that there's been an explosion of advances in both finance science, but also the integration of that finance science directly into finance practice. And if you look at the financial services industry today, if you look how the whole financial system works today, it is radically different than it was 50 years ago in that domain. Mainly, it's science-based. The science is totally integrated. They are, as fast as some of the newest things come out, they get adapted. Now, some of the more advanced work is seen or was seen as either highly specialized or just very advanced and not really needing or shouldn't be in the first course. It's for advanced students. But certain ones of them in particular have transformed themselves from being seen as specialized or advanced into the mainstream of just about everything we do in finance, both in science and in practice. And so for that reason, we wanted to bring those into the first section of the book that Zvi was talking about, because the whole start of the book, the whole idea of the book is first, learn the principles and the core concepts, which you'll use everywhere. And you'll use it for the rest of your professional life because they don't really change. Sometimes you add to them, but rarely do those principles change. That's what the nature of principles are. They're very long-lived in their robustness, okay? So that's what we do first in the book. We say no matter what you're going to do, corporate finance, capital markets, financial institutions, you have to understand these. And if you do, it's going to make life for you much easier because they are a part of you, just like you know how to speak your language. And they will always be there for you, not this year or next year. And this applies even in a world where we have enormous technological change, artificial intelligence, quantum computers, very important, will change and have a big impact, but they don't change the principles. So someone trained in principles and core concepts is going to be able to function in that world just the same as in the past. So we feel that's where we put it. Now, let me give you two examples. We have a number, but two examples of which one that Zvi alluded to in his comments on the introduction to the course, that to illustrate this. And you mentioned options. All right. Well, options are a very important financial instrument that's traded globally and has, it's important in their own sake. However, that's not why we put those in concepts. There are lots of very important markets, but they're not core concepts. Why we bring it here? Because options essentially mirror the way we make decisions under uncertainty. In other words, if you understand options, it gives you the fundamental insight of how we make decisions under uncertainty. And that is core to everything we do in finance, because finance as a subject is most interesting and most discovered. The reason it's important is that there's a great deal of uncertainty. And to abstract that and making decisions as if we know what the future is going to be doesn't work. All right. So that's the first reason for options. There's a second reason for bringing options into the core concepts. In one of the other core concept chapters, we talk about discounted cash flow. We all know what that is. That's been around. All of us were taught that. I don't care when you started as a professor or whatever, or just first learned finance, okay, as a valuation tool. Well, it turns out that option pricing is a different kind of, but a powerful and robust and can be used many, many places, tool for valuation. And happily, it works best in circumstances such as evaluating investment projects for corporations or evaluating the liabilities that they have to issue to finance those projects. Okay, it turns out to be a tool for valuation that works very well for those problems. Much better, in fact, than present discounted value. So, two key elements: the foundations of decision-making under uncertainty, and the idea we have a powerful second valuation tool, which is highly complementary to the other one, not overlapping. And so that's why we have a chapter on that. And to be sure, we not only have that in the concept section, but then we use that chapter, what's learned in that chapter, to prepare people in corporate finance. Several of section 2 of the book on corporate finance and so forth use this kind of technique and methodology for thinking about projects and so forth. And then it's used again in section 3, where we cover capital markets and financial institutions. So it permeates the whole book, illustrating the principle or the idea of teach principles and core concepts, and once those are learned, you can use them everywhere else to be more efficient in your teaching. They learn it better because it keeps being reinforced rather than, oh, I learned this in class 7 and I have to remember it, put it on my list. No, you use it again, again, and again. So it's self-reinforcing of the earlier teaching. So from a teacher's point of view, I've been doing it a long time, it just makes it easier for me to be able to communicate with the students and have a sense of whether they really are getting what's important. Okay, so that's options. And, no other textbook that I know. There are textbooks that have a chapter on options, but they treated it as, sort of a highly complicated mathematical thing that you do with these special kinds of instruments that are important because they're important markets, and they're also used for executive compensation and so forth. But that's the only way they're used. Here we have a chapter on that, and then later in other sections, we come back to options from the other perspectives. So I want to distinguish it from just saying we have a chapter on options, okay? And I think that's a really important illustration of the principles that were behind our decision to write this book. Now, there's a second important one that I want to call attention to, and that's personal finance. Now, if we think about it, the whole financial system was designed by man or persons, okay, to make people's lives better. All of us have to be engaged in finance in that way. So immediately, by putting personal finance in the core concept section, you know, among other things, motivate the newly brought into finance student, hey, this is something that I know I would like to know about, either for myself or to help my parents or whatever the reason. But knowing this will help me a great deal. And that's great because they see an application immediately from the concept. But it isn't like this is what they do. This is what they're interested in. So that works very well. But it doesn't just work for personally. The financial service industry is enormous and global. And it's growing more and more. And so if you should choose a career later to be in financial services, to help people with their finances, okay, then this is preparing you for that as well. And then finally, I'd mention, suppose you decide you want to be in government. You would like to work in the government of the country. Well, look what you do there, or either assist, or if you're elected to the offices, you are running the show. That what you need to do there are, of course, you pass laws. Well, finance is probably one of the most regulated, along with medicine, areas in the law. And to do a good job at regulation and so forth, you need to know about finance. If you were doing taxes, yes, you need to know about what taxes and the implications they are. If you are going to be a member of the Federal Reserve, they have to understand risks and how markets work and so forth. So it's personal finance, which has grown from something that was very touchy-feely, learn at the knee of someone the way to think about the world, into a very sophisticated, developed scientific approach to using data and information and modeling and reducing costs. I don't want to go on, but I can only point out to you, since the beginning of the 21st century, the transaction costs for example, trading in securities and so forth in the United States have dropped by 80 to 90%, maybe more, maybe even 95%. In developed non-U.S. countries, it's dropped by a similar amount. And in emerging market countries, where you think of, this is where they have the least sophisticated financial system, the cost of transactions, the cost of executing risk controls has dropped by even a bigger percentage. It's just multiples. It was high, but now it's much, much lower. So these are real effects you have on society. That's why personal finance, in my mind, belongs as a core concept. And again, I don't know of any introductory textbook that's sold that has that kind of approach and has that subject at the center of things to be learned in order to be introduced to finance.
Well, we try and do, I'd say, 4 main things to try and help instructors to adopt our textbook easily into their existing courses. The first is, as both Bob and Zvi mentioned, that it's principles-based. So we have our 10 principles that really permeate through the entirety of the book and really pull it all together. The second is that the book is modular. So we have 3 different parts for the book. The first part is core concepts and principles. The second part is corporate finance. And then the third is asset pricing and financial markets. And for an instructor, the idea is that it should be easy to see from the structure of our book how to adopt it into existing courses as well as new courses they might want to develop. So for example, an introductory course, depending on the length, could cover all 3 parts or could cover the first part. And then if it wanted to be more corporate finance focused, could cover the second part. Additionally, the book would also serve follow-on courses beyond the introductory course. So a course on corporate finance could focus exclusively or mostly on part 2. The third feature of the book that I think helps with adoption is that we try as much as we can to have clear step-by-step explanations of both the intuitive concepts as well as the mathematical examples. We include a lot of mathematical examples in the text with solutions. We have a number of quick check problems that both instructors as well as students can look and see the answers to those questions. And for each of them, we try and go step by step, very clearly showing which equations we use within the text, and then also trying not to skip any steps of the math, but really explain step by step the intuition of how to solve the problem. And then the final thing that I think will make our textbook appealing for adoption is the online suite of supplemental resources. We have supplemental Excel apps for many of the chapters that reinforce the concepts in the chapters and reinforce problem solving and how to view certain concepts in the chapters. We also have an online test bank of more than 800 questions, and these include questions that have randomly generated numbers that can be reused by instructors. So this can be used for both quizzes and tests as well as extra practice for the students. And then finally, we also have a suite of online videos, short videos that explain different concepts within the chapters. So I think combined, our hope is that with these different aspects of the books, they should make adoption for instructors a lot more straightforward. That can be adopted, again, into existing courses as well as developed into new courses, and also should help the learning on the part of the student be much more straightforward.
Whether or not you're like me teaching here in the United States or whether you're teaching in another country, we all have students from very different financial, institutional, and legal backgrounds. Countries are very different. And so courses that focus on the institutions, let's say in the Anglo-Saxon world, the United States in particular, that's of interest because the United States is a very important country throughout the world. But it doesn't help them very much in terms of thinking about or being able to deal with the world that they live in their own country. And, you know, as we see, both over time and across geopolitical borders, institutions, rules, practices, culture are all different. The beauty of focusing on principles and core concepts are that they work everywhere. They work in any country because they're not institutional based. They are principles, like in gravity is 9.8 meters per second, the surface of the Earth in New York, in Beijing, in Sao Paulo, in Frankfurt, okay, in Bangkok. Okay? Same number, same thing. That's a principle. Okay? It's a fact. And so if you teach to do that, then adapting to different countries and different changes in institutional ways of doing things, which is happening all the time, a training in principles and core concepts allows you to adapt to whatever that is. And so each of your students, even if you're in one country in the U.S., I'm sure you all have students from all around the world. This is a way to teach all of them, at least at the foundations, and prepare them so that they can adapt to their own situation, both at the moment when going back to home or in the future when the world of finance changes.
So I'll go into 2 examples of our 10 principles. One of the most well-known principles that we have as one of our 10 is the law of one price, which states that 2 assets that are identical, they give you the exact same cash flows, the exact same thing, They have to have the same price. Otherwise, financial markets may break down and there could be an arbitrage. And so this is a principle that ties much of our book together. For example, we start providing examples of, let's say you're an appraiser trying to value houses. It's a guiding principle that shows that the basis is if you have two identical houses, they should have the same price. But it's in all three parts of the book. For example, in corporate finance, a big focus is looking to value corporations and various companies. And so the law of one price is a guiding example that underlies all of the valuation models, saying we start with the base case of two companies that are identical in all respects, and then we adjust for differences between the two as appropriate. And then it also is featured prominently in financial markets. For example, any financial assets, such as a stock or a bond, again, if they provide you with the exact same cash flows, they'll have the same price. That's our basis. And then differences in the cash flows and differences in the characteristics will provide differences in the valuation of the two. Now, another example of a principle is the principle of flexibility. One of our core principles is that flexibility has value in financial decision-making, and the more flexibility, the more value. And this is something that is very key to finance. Finance, one of the main things about finance is dealing with uncertainty. The world is uncertain. We don't know what will happen in the future, but much of finance is about dealing with that type of uncertainty. And so this principle underlies both the development of options in the book and also has many applications throughout the book. One example of this is in corporate finance. For example, when you're a manager in a company trying to make decisions in the future, you don't know what will happen in the future. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so the more flexibility you have to, say, change your decision after more information comes in, the more valuable that opportunity is. And so these are two examples of principles amongst the 10 that, again, we try and permeate throughout the book and tries to tie all of the topics together.